Imagine this. You are lying in bed. The lights are low, and your mind is restless. Thoughts of tomorrow's responsibilities, yesterday's regrets, and all the little hungers of the heart crowd in. You want more comfort, more certainty, more love, more control. And yet, the more you want, the more restless you feel. This is not new. Over 2,500 years ago, a prince in northern India walked away from a palace filled with wealth, music, and luxury, only to discover a truth that still unsettles and soothes us today, that our desires, our endless wanting, are the very things that bind us to misery. But what if you could let go? What if, as you drifted to sleep tonight, you entered a world where the constant grasping of the mind softened, a world where the breath deepened, the body unclenched, and craving gave way to peace? This audiobook is not a lecture. It's a story, a slow, unfolding journey into the philosophy of the Buddha, the man who became awake. Together we'll walk through ancient forests, sit beneath the Bodhi tree, and hear the simple, radical truth that shook empires and has calmed minds for centuries. As you listen, allow each word to feel like a lullaby, a reminder that you are safe, that life can be held gently, and that sleep is not so different from enlightenment, a surrender, a quiet release of struggle. So, breathe in and breathe out. Let us begin. The young Siddhartha Gautama was born into a world of unimaginable privilege, in a kingdom where everything he could desire was arranged for him. His father, King Shuddhodana, ruled in the foothills of the Himalayas, and for his beloved son he wished nothing but happiness and protection. So he built for him palaces, 3 of them, one for each season, filled with gardens that bloomed even when the outside world was harsh, filled with dancers who never seemed to grow tired, musicians whose songs floated into the evening air, and delicacies of every kind. Siddhartha's life was painted in gold. He had servants to attend to him, wealth to surround him, and family who adored him. He was married young to the beautiful Yasodhara, and soon they would have a son. By every worldly measure, Siddhartha should have been content, and yet, something stirred inside of him. Even as a child, he seemed strangely contemplative, drawn less to the noise of celebration and more to quiet moments by himself. He would sit in the palace gardens, watching the flicker of candlelight on water, listening to the rustle of leaves in the breeze. There was a kind of gentle melancholy about him, an awareness that all of this abundance, all of this finery, did not soothe something deeper inside. It is said that he was so sensitive to the suffering of others that even small things, a servant stumbling, an animal in pain, would weigh heavily on his mind. His father, determined to shield him from such feelings, gave orders that Siddhartha should never see anything unpleasant. Everything around him was carefully arranged to keep ugliness out of sight. Old age, illness, poverty, even death, none of it was ever to be seen by the young prince. But desire is a strange thing. The more you try to shield someone from the truth of the world, the more curiosity grows. Siddhartha felt the hollowness of palace life. Banquets and feasts that once dazzled him now felt repetitive. Songs that once delighted him now seemed to echo the same empty notes. He began to feel that he was living inside a dream woven by others, meant to keep him asleep. His heart told him that beyond the palace walls there was something more, something unknown, something he could not yet name. Imagine him lying awake at night, in a chamber perfumed with incense, silk sheets against his skin, the faint music of flutes drifting from another room. By all accounts, he should have been at peace. And yet his mind circled with questions. Why did joy feel fleeting? Why did pleasure fade so quickly into boredom? Why did the heart, no matter how much it was given, seemed to want more. This restlessness grew inside him, like a tide pressing against the shore. The palace, for all its splendor, became a cage. A gilded cage? Yes, but still a cage. His father's love, protective though it was, began to feel like a chain around his ankle. Because the truth of life cannot be hidden forever. Sooner or later, the veil slips. Sooner or later, reality insists on being seen. The story tells us that Siddhartha's yearning could not be stilled by distraction. He had known every delight that wealth could offer, and yet something essential eluded him. What is this life for? Why do pleasures fade? Why does the heart remain unsatisfied, no matter how much it drinks? These questions would follow him like a shadow, and though he could not yet answer them, he could not ignore them either. This is the beginning of his journey. The moment when desire itself, the desire to know truth, to see reality as it is, awoke within him. It was not a desire for more luxury, but for meaning. Not for gold, but for wisdom. And in this quiet restlessness, his life began to shift. Siddhartha's restless longing only deepened, until one day he persuaded his charioteer, Channa, to take him beyond the palace gates. It was the first time he had truly glimpsed the world outside, the carefully curated illusions his father had built for him. The air was different beyond those walls. The streets were filled not with musicians and perfumed flowers, but with people, ordinary people, whose lives unfolded in struggle as much as in joy. Siddhartha, with his clear eyes and gentle curiosity, looked upon them, not as a distant prince, but as a fellow human being, seeing humanity for the first time. And then he saw the first sight. An old man, bent with age, his back curved, his steps slow and trembling, his skin wrinkled, his hair white. This was something Siddhartha had never been allowed to see. In his sheltered world, age was hidden away, kept behind closed doors. He turned to Channa and asked, "What has happened to this man? Why does he appear this way?" And Channa explained, gently but truthfully, "This is what happens to all living beings. Time does not spare anyone. Youth fades, strength wanes, the body changes and grows frail." The realization struck Siddhartha like a blow. He had lived surrounded by youth and beauty, never realizing that these things would not last. His heart filled with compassion, but also with a trembling sense of fear. If this is the destiny of every person, then no amount of wealth or power can prevent it. On another journey, he saw the second sight. A man writhing with sickness, his body fevered, his breathing labored, his eyes full of pain. Siddhartha had never been shown sickness before, never witnessed the vulnerability of the body in its weakness. Again he asked Channa, "What is this affliction? Does this happen to all people?" And again the answer was yes. Sickness is woven into life. No one escapes it. No fortress can keep it out. Siddhartha's mind churned. He saw that even the most joyful faces could one day twist in pain. Even the most vibrant lives could be brought low by illness. Again, he felt compassion. But again, he felt the gnawing pull of despair. The third sight came soon after. A funeral procession passing down the road. Mourners walked with bowed heads, carrying a body wrapped for burial. The stillness of death was unmistakable. Siddhartha had never seen death before. To him, life had always been presented as eternal celebration, a string of pleasures without end. Now, before his eyes, was the great ending that comes for all. He turned once more to Channa. "Is this the fate of every being? Will even I, even my father, Even Yasodhara, my beloved wife, even Rahula, my little son, will we all face this? Channa did not hide the truth. Yes, death is certain. None are spared. The prince's world cracked open. Old age, sickness, and death. Three shadows that no palace walls could keep away. He felt the weight of existence pressing in. If everything ends, if everything decays, what is the worth of chasing fleeting pleasures? What is the point of endless feasts? If one day the body cannot eat, what is the point of beauty? If it fades, what is the point of life? If it must dissolve into death? And yet, amidst this despair, Siddhartha encountered the fourth sight, a wandering ascetic, calm and serene, clothed in simple robes, carrying nothing but a begging bowl. His face was lined, yet radiant with peace. He had renounced comfort, wealth, and family ties, and yet he carried within him a quiet dignity, a stillness that the prince had never seen before. Here was a man who had looked at old age, sickness, and death, and had not collapsed into despair. Instead, he had walked into the truth and found another way. Siddhartha's heart, heavy with sorrow, suddenly lifted with hope. If suffering is woven into life, perhaps there is also a path beyond it. Perhaps there is a way not to escape old age, sickness, and death, but to face them without fear. The four sights changed him forever. Once seen, they could not be unseen. Once known, they could not be forgotten. And the restlessness that had haunted him in the palace now crystallized into resolve. He could no longer remain behind gilded walls, pretending the world was otherwise. He could no longer live in ignorance. He had to seek, to question, to find. And so, the journey toward awakening truly began. The palace had grown heavier on Siddhartha's heart with each passing day. After seeing old age, sickness, death, and the quiet serenity of the wandering monk, the veil had been lifted from his eyes. The walls that once seemed like a protective embrace now felt like prison gates. Every feast laid out before him, every song sung in the long evenings, carried the taste of impermanence. He looked at his wife, Yasodhara, luminous and gentle, and at his infant son Rahula, with his innocent hands grasping at the world. And he loved them deeply. Yet even their love reminded him of the truth he had seen, that they, too, were fragile, subject to the same cycle of change, decay, and loss. It is said that one night, while the palace lay sleeping, Siddhartha walked through its silent halls. The lamps flickered low, the fragrance of jasmine still hung in the air, and the sound of soft breathing rose from the women who had danced and sung themselves into exhaustion. To anyone else, it would have seemed like a scene of serenity, but to him it was a vision of suffering concealed beneath the mask of beauty. He saw that every pleasure was fleeting, every delight already slipping into the past, even as it was tasted. He looked at the faces of the women faces that would one day wrinkle, voices that would one day falter, bodies that would one day weaken. The realization pressed heavily upon him. No matter how gilded the cage, no matter how rich the illusions, they could not change the law of impermanence. When he returned to his own chamber, he found Yasodhara and the child asleep. The child's breath rose and fell softly, his small hand resting on his mother's arm. Siddhartha longed to hold him one last time, but he did not dare to wake them. If he touched the boy, he thought, love would bind him too tightly. If he looked too long at Yasodhara's face, radiant even in sleep, he would falter. To seek the truth, he would need courage, stronger than attachment. So Siddhartha made his decision. He called quietly for Channa. his faithful charioteer, and asked him to prepare his horse, Kanthaka. In the silence of the night, the two of them slipped out of the palace gates, leaving behind the guarded gardens, the echo of music, and the warmth of family. The moonlight guided them through the fields, the horses' hooves muffled against the earth. Legend tells us that even the gods watched with awe, knowing that something monumental was unfolding. For here was a man giving up everything that others spent their lives clinging to. Siddhartha was not leaving poverty in search of wealth. He was leaving wealth in search of truth. He was not abandoning suffering to find pleasure. He was abandoning pleasure to understand suffering itself. At the edge of the forest, far from the lights of the palace, Siddhartha dismounted. He removed his princely ornaments, the jewelry that marked his status, and handed them to Channa. With a steady hand, he drew his sword and cut off his long hair, the symbol of his royal identity. What remained was not a prince, not a nobleman, but a seeker bare, vulnerable, yet profoundly free. He exchanged his silks for the simple robes of a wandering ascetic, took up a bowl for alms, and stepped into the forest as dawn began to break. The great departure was not a rejection of love, nor a denial of family. It was a recognition that love itself demanded something deeper than attachment. Siddhartha carried no bitterness, no disdain for the life he had known, but he understood that if he stayed, he would remain blind to the full reality of existence. He had to leave behind what was dearest to him, not because it was unworthy, but because it was incomplete. Imagine the silence of that first morning, the world awakening around him, the cries of birds, the cool breath of wind through trees, the feel of the earth beneath his feet. For the first time in his life, Siddhartha was not sheltered, not protected, not surrounded by comfort. And yet he felt an exhilaration unlike anything he had known. The world was raw, uncertain, unpredictable, and he was ready to walk straight into its heart. The great departure is remembered not only as a physical journey, but as a turning point of the spirit. It is the moment when a human being, like you and me, chose to face the deepest questions rather than hide from them. It is the moment when a man surrendered everything he had been told would bring happiness, in order to seek the kind of happiness that does not fade. This is why his story has lasted for thousands of years. Because all of us, in our own ways, carry the restlessness of Siddhartha. All of us feel, at some point, that no matter how much we gain, it is not enough. All of us sense that the treasures we cling to slip away, leaving us searching for something more enduring. Siddhartha's great departure is not just his. It is the archetype of every soul that longs to awaken. When Siddhartha left the palace, he did not yet know where the path would lead. He only knew that he must seek, and so he sought out teachers, ascetics, and holy men who promised knowledge. In northern India at that time, the forests were filled with seekers. Some practiced meditation to quiet the mind. Others engaged in elaborate rituals to appease unseen forces. And many believed that the way to liberation was through punishing the body, stripping it of all comfort until the spirit was free. Siddhartha studied under some of the finest meditation masters of his age. He quickly mastered the practices they taught, entering deep states of concentration where thought fell silent and bliss arose like a still lake. His teachers praised him, even offered to make him their successor. But Siddhartha felt a quiet dissatisfaction once more. These states were powerful, but they were impermanent. The bliss faded, and the mind returned to its restless cycle. He realized that concentration alone was not the answer, so he turned to the path of extreme asceticism. Along with a small group of fellow seekers, he abandoned comfort entirely. They lived in the forest, exposed to the elements, wearing rags, sleeping on the ground. They ate almost nothing, determined to starve the desires out of their bodies. Siddhartha pushed himself harder than any of them. He reduced his meals to a single grain of rice a day. His body wasted away, ribs jutting like a cage, his skin drawn tight, his hair brittle. He became so thin, it is said, that he could touch his spine by pressing his stomach. People who passed by sometimes mistook him for a corpse. Yet still, he persisted, believing that perhaps by conquering the body entirely, he could transcend suffering. But what he discovered was profound. The body weakened, the mind clouded, and wisdom did not come. Hunger consumed him. Pain dominated his thoughts. Instead of freeing him, asceticism chained him more tightly to the body's cries. One day, after years of this self-denial, Siddhartha collapsed by the riverbank. He was too weak to stand, his breath shallow, his vision blurred. It was then that a village girl named Sujata saw him, and moved by compassion, offered him a bowl of milk rice. At first, Siddhartha hesitated. To accept nourishment was to admit that his ascetic path had failed. But in that moment of weakness, he understood something crucial. Starving himself was not bringing him closer to liberation. He accepted the food, and with each sip, strength returned to his body. The other ascetics saw this and turned away, condemning him for breaking his vows. But Siddhartha felt a quiet clarity that he had not known before. He realized that the truth could not be found in extremes, neither in indulgence nor in denial. To cling to pleasure was bondage, but to cling to suffering was also bondage. Both were traps, different sides of the same chain. This was the birth of what he would later call the middle way, a path not of excess and not of self-torture, but of balance. The body is not an enemy to be destroyed, nor a god to be worshipped. It is a vessel, fragile yet sacred, that carries the mind and heart on their journey. Care for it too much, and you are enslaved. Neglect it too much, and you cannot walk the path at all. The lesson of those years was simple, but not easy. Suffering alone does not purify us. Pain for its own sake does not make us wise. True freedom is not found in extremes, but in a steady, balanced walk between them. As Siddhartha regained his strength, he prepared himself for the next and greatest stage of his journey. He had seen through the illusions of pleasure, and he had seen through the illusions of pain. Now he was ready to see reality as it truly was. When Siddhartha accepted that bowl of milk rice from Sujata, it was more than food. It was a turning point, a quiet realization blooming like a lotus in muddy water. His years of denial had stripped him of everything but skin and bone, and still wisdom had not arrived. Instead of clarity, there was exhaustion. Instead of freedom, there was a chain of hunger and pain. By taking nourishment again, he was not betraying the path, he was opening himself to a deeper understanding. He sat quietly after eating, feeling strength return to his body. For the first time in years, his thoughts were not clouded by dizziness, not consumed by the gnawing ache of starvation. He saw clearly that the way he had been living was no more liberating than the life of luxury he had left behind. Both extremes had led to bondage. First, he had lived as a prince, surrounded by feasts, song, and silk, and he had felt trapped. Then he had lived as an ascetic, reducing himself to shadow and bone, and he had felt equally trapped. Pleasure and pain had both failed him. It was then that the notion of balance began to unfold in his mind. Life, he saw, is like a string on a lute. If the string is too tight, it snaps. If the string is too loose, it makes no sound. Only when the string is tuned just right can it produce harmony. So it is with the human spirit. If one clings to indulgence, the mind becomes heavy and dull. If one clings to self-denial, the mind becomes weak and clouded. But if one walks between them, nourishing the body without worshipping it, disciplining the mind without torturing it, the path opens. This middle way was not something taught to him by a teacher, nor was it found in scriptures. It arose from direct experience, from living fully through both extremes and discovering their futility. It was the wisdom of balance, the understanding that truth is not found in running from life nor in drowning in it, but in walking steadily, carefully, awake to each step. As Siddhartha reflected, he saw that all beings suffer, not only because of what they have, but because of how they cling. A rich man clings to wealth, and he fears its loss. A poor man clings to suffering, and he fears its end because it has become his identity. A lover clings to another's presence, and the thought of separation fills them with grief. A wanderer clings to solitude, and the presence of others feels like a burden. It is not the object itself that binds, it is the grasping. The middle way was not about rejecting life, but about loosening the grasp. He began to walk again, slowly regaining his strength, carrying with him this new clarity. Villagers who saw him no longer recoiled at his skeletal frame. They saw a man glowing with quiet composure. His companions, the ascetics who had once practiced alongside him, looked on with disappointment, believing he had abandoned the path. But Siddhartha no longer sought approval. He had glimpsed a deeper truth, and it was enough. Balance would become the guiding principle of his journey. It would shape not only his awakening, but the path he would later share with others. To sit in meditation without starving. To live simply without drowning in excess. To speak honestly without cruelty. To work diligently without obsession. To walk the path with discipline, but also with kindness toward oneself. The middle way was not compromise, it was clarity. It was a way of walking that allowed him to see reality without the distortion of craving or the fog of aversion. And so Siddhartha prepared himself for the final stage of his search. He had left luxury. He had left denial. Now he carried nothing but his mind, his body, and the steady rhythm of balance. Somewhere within that balance, he knew the answer waited. Siddhartha walked to the banks of the Naranjara River, where a great tree stood, its branches spreading wide, its leaves whispering in the wind. This was the Bodhi tree, though he did not yet know it by that name. He laid down his simple mat of grass and sat beneath it, crossing his legs, his body upright, his gaze turned inward. The world around him was still the rustle of leaves, the murmur of water, the distant cry of birds. He breathed slowly, deeply, feeling each breath like a wave, rising and falling. He had resolved that he would not rise until he had seen the truth. No matter how long it took, no matter what arose within him, he would remain seated, steady as the roots of the tree. It is said that in that moment, the earth itself bore witness, sensing the gravity of his vow. But great vows draw great challenges. As he sank into meditation, the forces of illusion stirred. In the stories, these forces are given a name: Mara, the tempter, the embodiment of fear, desire, and doubt. Mara appeared with his armies, with storms and demons, with the thunder of drums meant to shake Siddhartha's resolve. The earth trembled, the sky darkened, visions of terror filled the air. Yet Siddhartha sat unmoving, his mind calm, his body steady. He saw that these storms were not outside him, but within him, manifestations of fear, anger, and longing. And because he recognized them, they lost their power. When fear could not break him, Mara sent desire. Illusions of beauty and pleasure danced before him, promising comfort, promising bliss. But Siddhartha had already tasted the fleeting sweetness of desire, and he knew its emptiness. He let the visions pass, like clouds drifting across a wide sky. Finally, Mara tried doubt, a whisper that said, "Who are you to seek such truth? Who are you to think you can awaken? The path is too hard, the truth too hidden, the burden too great. Go back. Rest. Forget this foolish vow." These words might have shaken another, but Siddhartha placed his hand upon the earth, calling it to witness. The ground beneath him affirmed his resolve. He would not rise. Through the long night, he sat, facing illusion after illusion, temptation after temptation. Each time, he returned to balance, not clinging, not rejecting, simply aware, steady, awake. As the hours passed, his mind grew clear, like a lake, undisturbed by wind. In the final watch of the night, as dawn approached, his meditation deepened. He saw with perfect clarity the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth that binds all beings. He saw how craving and ignorance drive this cycle, leading to suffering again and again. And he saw that it was possible to break free, to end the cycle, to let go completely. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Siddhartha opened his eyes. The Bodhi tree's leaves shivered in the morning breeze, and the world seemed newly born. He was no longer Siddhartha, the restless prince, nor Siddhartha, the starving ascetic. He was the Buddha, the awakened one. He had seen through the illusions of pleasure and pain, fear and desire. He had touched the stillness beyond them, the liberation that comes when craving is extinguished. The night beneath the Bodhi tree is remembered as the turning of an age. One man, by sitting still, had found the freedom that no palace, no ritual, no philosophy had ever given him. And in that freedom, he felt not isolation, but compassion. For he saw that every being, every bird in the trees, every insect in the grass, every person bound by sorrow, longed for the same peace. From that night forward, the Buddha would carry this vision into the world, not as a secret to hoard, but as a path to share. But in that moment, beneath the spreading branches, there was only silence, only breath, only the deep stillness of awakening. When the Buddha rose from beneath the Bodhi tree, the world around him was the same as it had always been. Yet, he himself had changed entirely. The trees still whispered, the river still flowed, people still lived and died as before. But he now saw with piercing clarity what lay at the heart of existence. His awakening was not the discovery of something hidden in the stars or buried in the earth. It was the simple, undeniable recognition of what had always been present. And the first truth that dawned upon him was this: life contains suffering. It is not a statement made to cast a shadow over joy, nor a rejection of all the beauty life holds. Rather, it is an acknowledgement, as natural as noticing that the sun is warm or that fire burns. Everywhere he looked, the Buddha saw that beings, great and small, were bound by an undercurrent of unease. Even in moments of pleasure, there lingered the quiet fear that it would end. Even in times of health, there was the seed of illness waiting to sprout. Even in love, there was the shadow of separation. He remembered the old man he had seen on the road beyond the palace, bent with age and struggling to walk. He remembered the sick man writhing in pain, the lifeless body carried in solemn procession, and the faces of those who mourned. These were not rare accidents, but part of the fabric of life. No matter how strong, everybody ages. No matter how careful, everybody grows sick. No matter how loved, everybody will one day die. This was the universal condition, and no palace walls or rituals could keep it at bay. But the Buddha's insight went deeper. Suffering was not only in old age, sickness, and death. It was present even in the small, ordinary rhythms of daily living. A farmer toils in the field and worries about the harvest. A merchant carries goods to market and fears he will be cheated. A mother holds her child and trembles at the thought of losing them. Even in joy there is tension, for the mind clings, hoping the moment will never change. Yet everything does. This is what the Buddha called dukkha, a word sometimes translated as suffering, but more broadly meaning the pervasive unsatisfactoriness of life. Dukkha is the pebble in the shoe, the itch that cannot be scratched, the sense that no matter how much we gain, something is missing. It appears when we are denied what we want, when we are forced to face what we do not want, and even when we receive exactly what we asked for, because then the fear of loss arises. It is the common thread woven through every human heart. This truth is not meant to weigh the spirit down, but to set it free. For what is hidden cannot be healed, and what is denied cannot be understood. By speaking plainly, life contains suffering. The Buddha invited people to look directly at their experience instead of turning away. In the stillness of meditation, he had seen that denying sorrow only deepens it, while acknowledging it opens the possibility of release. To hear this truth is unsettling at first. We long for assurances that life is meant to be smooth, that happiness can be permanent, if only we work hard enough, if only we are good enough, if only we find the right person, the right path, the right treasure. But the Buddha offered something more radical than false comfort. He said, "Look honestly, see things as they are. The cracks in the vase are not mistakes. They are part of the vase. The fragility of life is not an error. It is the nature of life." Yet even as he spoke this truth, he did not stop at despair. For woven into the first noble truth was also compassion. If all beings suffer, then all beings are united. The pain that you carry is not yours alone. It is the pain of humanity, the pain of existence itself. To know suffering is to know our kinship with every creature, to recognize in another's tears the reflection of our own. And with that recognition comes tenderness. Thus, the first noble truth was the foundation. It was the ground upon which the rest of his teaching would stand. Without acknowledging suffering, no path to peace could be walked. But by acknowledging it fully, without turning away, one could begin to glimpse freedom. For if we can understand suffering, perhaps we can also understand its cause. And if we can understand its cause, perhaps we can let it go. The Buddha's insight did not end with the recognition that life contains suffering. That was the doorway. But beyond it lay the question that had driven him from the palace, through years of wandering, to the roots of the Bodhi tree. Why? Why do beings suffer? What binds them to this wheel of sorrow? In the quiet of his meditation, he saw the answer as clearly as one sees the reflection of the moon on still water. Desire, craving, attachment. These were the roots that nourished the tree of suffering. He saw how every being reaches outward, yearning for something to complete them. We long for pleasure, for possessions, for recognition, for security. We build plans and chase goals, believing that when we achieve them, happiness will be lasting. But the moment one desire is fulfilled, another arises. A child wants a sweet. Once the sweet is gone, they want another. An adult wins praise. Once the praise fades, they hunger for more. Desire is endless, a fire that consumes everything given to it. and still hungers for more. He also saw that attachment is not limited to material things. We cling to ideas, to identities, to beliefs about who we are. We cling to the thought, "I am strong." And when illness comes, we suffer doubly. We cling to the thought, "I am loved." And when relationships change, the pain cuts deeper. We cling to, "I am young." And when years pass, we grieve not only the body, but the image we once held of it. Even joy becomes suffering when the mind insists it must not end. Desire whispers constantly, "Hold this, grasp that, resist change." But change is the nature of all things. To fight against impermanence is to fight against reality itself, and this struggle is the essence of dukkha. The Buddha compared craving to a river that floods its banks, sweeping away everything in its path. As long as we are caught in its current, we are carried from one shore to another, from one birth to another, never at rest. He saw, too, how craving gives rise to cycles of becoming. A thought arises, "I want." That wanting leads to grasping. Grasping leads to becoming a person who fears loss, becoming a person who suffers when the object changes or slips away. From becoming comes birth into new moments, and with birth comes aging, sickness, and death. Once again, round and round it goes, an endless wheel, spun by desire. But just as he saw the cause, he also saw the possibility of freedom. For if desire creates suffering, then the weakening of desire brings release. Like a fire that burns only as long as there is fuel, suffering burns only as long as we feed it with craving. To see this was not to demand that life be rejected, nor to say that love, beauty, and joy are wrong. It was to see that clinging poisons even the sweetest moments, while letting go allows them to be experienced in their fullness without fear. This second noble truth was not a condemnation of life, but a map of its hidden mechanics. It was a light shining on the inner workings of the heart, revealing why joy slips so easily into sorrow, why gain so quickly becomes anxiety, why even comfort hides a seed of unease. By tracing the roots of suffering to desire and attachment, the Buddha pointed the way forward. For if we can see the cause, then we can begin to release it. Imagine a hand grasping tightly at water, only to feel it slip away. The tighter the grip, the more the water escapes. But if the hand opens, the water rests gently within it. So it is with life. When we grasp, we suffer. When we let go, we discover peace. And so the Buddha offered his followers not only a diagnosis, but also hope. Suffering has a cause, and because it has a cause, it is not eternal. It is not a curse upon existence, but a fire we ourselves keep feeding. And if we stop, the fire grows quiet. This was the profound promise at the heart of his teaching, a promise that would lead naturally to the third noble truth. But even before that promise, the recognition of craving as the root of misery was itself liberating. To see clearly is already to be half free. The Buddha's teaching of the first two noble truths can feel heavy at first glance. Life contains suffering, and the cause of suffering is desire and attachment. These are truths that pierce the heart, truths that demand honesty and courage. But he did not stop there. If he had spoken only of suffering and its cause, his teaching would have been bleak, a philosophy of despair. Yet the Buddha was not a prophet of despair. He was a guide to freedom. And so he revealed the third noble truth, the truth that suffering can cease, that release is possible, that there is an end to the restless cycle. This truth is simple in its phrasing and profound in its implications. If craving and clinging are the cause of misery, then the cessation of craving and clinging is the end of misery. If suffering is a fire fueled by desire, then by withdrawing the fuel, the fire burns out. The Buddha called this cessation nirvana, a word that means to blow out, like the extinguishing of a flame. It is not the extinguishing of life, not the annihilation of existence, but the extinguishing of the flames of greed, hatred, and delusion. When he spoke of nirvana, he did not describe it in the language of things to be grasped. He avoided turning it into another object of desire, another goal to cling to. Instead, he spoke of it as peace, the peace that arises when the grasping hand finally opens, the stillness that comes when the restless mind no longer chases one thought after another, the freedom that appears when we stop struggling against impermanence and allow life to flow as it does. Imagine for a moment the relief of putting down a burden you have carried for years. The body straightens, the breath deepens, the world feels lighter. Nirvana is that kind of release, but at the deepest level of being. It is the moment when the cycle of craving and dissatisfaction is broken, when the chain of becoming and rebirth is severed. It is the state of being fully awake, no longer bound by the illusions that tie us to suffering. The Buddha was clear. This state is not reserved for a chosen few. It is not the reward of divine favor, not a gift granted by a god, not the inheritance of priests or kings. It is available to anyone who sees clearly, who walks the path with sincerity. Just as fire will always extinguish when deprived of fuel, so too will suffering always cease when deprived of craving. This law is not personal, not selective, it is universal. In this truth, hope arises. Because if suffering is inevitable, if it were woven into life without cause or cure, then despair would be our only companion. But the Buddha declared something radical. Suffering is not inevitable. It has a cause, and therefore it has an end. The chains that bind us are real, but they are not unbreakable. The prison exists, but the door is unlocked. We need only the courage to see it, and the clarity to step through. The promise of nirvana is not about fleeing life, nor about seeking some distant heaven beyond the clouds. It is about liberation, here and now. The Buddha often spoke of nirvana as the highest happiness, but it is a happiness not dependent on conditions. Worldly joys are fragile. Wealth can be lost. Health can falter. Relationships can change. But nirvana is a peace that does not depend on changing circumstances. It is the peace of a mind unshaken by gain or loss, praise or blame, pleasure or pain. To approach nirvana is to taste freedom, to live without the fever of craving, without the constant hunger for more, to love without clinging, to work without greed, to face death without fear. It is not that life becomes free of change, but that change no longer terrifies. It is not that sorrow disappears, but that sorrow no longer imprisons. The Buddha described this release as the highest jewel, the rarest treasure. It is beyond words, yet it can be known. And though it may sound distant, it begins with simple steps, steps anyone can take. Every moment we choose not to feed anger, we taste a little nirvana. Every time we let go of craving, even briefly, we taste a little nirvana. Every time we rest in the present moment, free from the grasping of the past and the chasing of the future, we taste a little nirvana. The ultimate release is the culmination of these moments, a freedom so complete that no fire of craving can ever ignite again. Thus, the third noble truth is both a promise and an invitation. The promise that suffering can end, and the invitation to walk the path toward that end. A path that the Buddha himself had walked, a path he now offered to the world. The Buddha did not leave the third noble truth hanging as an abstract idea. It was not enough to tell people that release is possible. He knew that human beings need guidance, a way to live, a map to follow. So he revealed the fourth noble truth, the truth of the path that leads to the cessation of suffering. This path, he said, was like a middle road, a balanced way of living that avoids both indulgence and denial, both excess and deprivation. He called it the Eightfold Path, and it was not a set of commandments, not rigid laws, but a practical guide for cultivating wisdom, ethical conduct, and mental clarity. He described the path as noble because it ennobles those who walk it. It transforms ordinary life into a journey of awakening. And he described it as eightfold because it has 8 interwoven aspects, like strands of a single rope, each strengthening the others. Though they can be named one by one, they are not separate steps taken in order, but qualities cultivated together, like instruments joining in harmony. The first aspect he called right view. To walk the path, one must first see clearly, free from the haze of delusion. Right view is the understanding of the noble truths themselves, that life contains suffering, that suffering arises from craving, that release is possible, and that the path leads to release. It is not blind belief, but the willingness to look at reality honestly, to see things as they are, not as we wish them to be. From right view flows right intention. To cultivate a mind guided by kindness, by compassion, by the resolve to let go of hatred and greed. Intention shapes every action, like the rudder of a boat shaping its course. Right intention is the quiet decision to live in a way that brings peace rather than harm, to act from generosity rather than selfishness. The path continues into right speech, right action, and right livelihood, the ethical dimension of life. Right speech is to speak truthfully, gently, and with purpose. To avoid words that wound, words that divide, words that deceive. Right action is to live in a way that does not harm others, to abstain from violence, from theft, from exploitation. Right livelihood is to earn one's way without causing suffering, to choose work that nourishes rather than destroys. Then come right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration, the cultivation of the mind. Right effort is the steady tending of the heart, like a gardener pulling weeds and planting seeds. It is the effort to abandon unwholesome states and to nurture wholesome ones, not with strain, but with patience. Right mindfulness is the practice of being fully present, of watching the mind and body without clinging or aversion, of seeing thoughts and sensations as passing clouds. Right concentration is the deepening of meditation, the quiet settling of the mind into states of stillness and clarity, where insight can arise. Together, these 8 aspects form a path that is practical, balanced, and profound. It is a path that can be walked by anyone, regardless of wealth or status, by layperson or monk, by king or beggar. It does not demand retreat from the world, but it transforms the way we live within it. Every choice, every word, every breath can become part of the path. The Buddha often compared the Eightfold Path to medicine. The first noble truth is the diagnosis. Life contains suffering. The second is the cause, craving. The third is the prognosis. It can be cured. And the fourth is the prescription. Here is the medicine. Here is the treatment. But like any medicine, it only works if taken. It is not enough to admire the bottle or memorize the ingredients. One must practice, must walk, must live it. The beauty of the path is that it is self-validating. When walked with sincerity, it produces results. Peace grows where there was turmoil. Compassion blossoms where there was bitterness. Clarity emerges where there was confusion. Little by little, step by step, the fires of craving weaken, and the cool breeze of nirvana begins to flow. And so the fourth noble truth completes the circle. Life contains suffering. Suffering has a cause. Suffering can end. And there is a path that leads to that end. These are not distant ideals, not lofty abstractions, but truths lived and tested by the Buddha himself. Truths offered freely to anyone who longs to be free. To walk the path of awakening, the Buddha taught, one must first begin with seeing clearly. Without clarity, every step wavers, every action stumbles. The mind is like a lantern in the dark. If the glass is clouded with smoke, the light flickers weakly and distorts what it touches. But if the glass is cleaned, the light shines steadily, illuminating things as they are. This, he said, is right view. Right view is not a rigid belief, not a creed to be memorized and defended, but a way of looking that cuts through delusion. It begins with understanding the noble truths, that life contains suffering, that suffering arises from craving, that release is possible, and that the path leads to release. These truths are not meant to be recited like charms, but to be seen in the fabric of experience. When we are hungry, when we are restless, when we feel grief or joy or fear, right view is the recognition of how these states arise and pass, how they are bound to craving or released by letting go. Right view also means perceiving the world without the filters of greed, hatred, and ignorance. So often, we look not at what is, but at what we wish or fear it to be. We see through the lens of our desires, projecting beauty or ugliness, worth or worthlessness. Right view is the quiet stripping away of these projections, the willingness to let the world reveal itself in its impermanence, its interdependence, its constant change. To see a flower not as something to possess, nor as something meaningless, but as a fleeting miracle of color and form, alive in this moment and fading in the next. From right view arises right intention, the quiet resolve of the heart. For once the world is seen clearly, the question becomes, how will we live in it? Right intention is the setting of the compass. It is not enough to know the direction. One must also choose to walk it. The Buddha described right intention as the cultivation of thoughts guided by compassion, by harmlessness, by renunciation of greed. It is the intention to live gently, to cause no harm where harm can be avoided. It is the intention to turn away from hatred, to resist the pull of anger, to respond with kindness even when hurt. And it is the intention to let go of the restless hunger for more, the constant reaching that exhausts the mind. Right intention is like the wind that fills the sails of a boat. Without it, even the clearest map remains unused. With it, every step becomes purposeful. Each morning, we can pause and ask, what is the direction of my heart today? Will I live to grasp? Or will I live to give? Will I dwell in resentment? Or will I choose forgiveness? These quiet decisions shape the entire course of life. And so right view and right intention together form the beginning of the noble path. They are the eyes that see and the heart that chooses. With clarity and purpose, the steps ahead become steady. Without them, the path dissolves into confusion. But with them, each breath, each thought, each action becomes part of the journey toward freedom. Once clarity and intention are set, the path turns toward conduct, the way we live with others in the fabric of daily life. For the Buddha, wisdom and compassion are not hidden in remote mountains. They are woven into the way we speak, act, and work, right speech, right action, and right livelihood are the expressions of the awakened heart in ordinary existence. Right speech begins with the recognition that words are not light. They are weighty, carrying the power to heal or to wound, to unite or to divide. A careless word can echo for years, while a kind word can transform despair into hope. The Buddha urged his followers to speak truthfully, but also kindly, purposefully, and at the right time, to avoid lies that deceive, harsh speech that injures, gossip that divides, or idle chatter that wastes the mind's energy. Imagine a person who speaks with care, whose words are steady and gentle. In their presence, others feel at ease, not because every word is pleasing, but because every word is trustworthy. Right speech is not about silence, but about creating harmony. It is the sound of honesty, wrapped in compassion. From right speech flows right action, the choices we make with our bodies. The Buddha taught the simple principle of non-harming. Do not kill, do not steal, do not misuse sexuality, do not exploit. These are not commandments to be obeyed out of fear, but practices that protect the heart from regret and turmoil. To act with care is to live in alignment with the peace we seek. A person who refrains from harm, who gives instead of taking, who honors the dignity of others, feels a deep quietness within. Their sleep is untroubled, their conscience light. Right action is not only restraint, it is generosity, kindness, service, to help where we can, to protect the vulnerable, to plant seeds of goodness. The smallest gestures, a smile, a meal shared, a hand extended, become steps on the path. Each act leaves an imprint on the heart, softening it, shaping it, preparing it for awakening. Then comes right livelihood, the way we sustain ourselves in the world. The Buddha understood that work is not separate from practice. The way we earn our living can either nourish compassion or feed greed and harm. He advised avoiding trades that exploit life, that profit from violence, deceit, or intoxication. Instead, he encouraged work that is honest, that supports well-being, that contributes to harmony. To live with right livelihood is to know that the food on the table, the clothes on the body, the roof overhead are not tainted by suffering caused to others. It is to know that one's daily labor does not weigh down the heart with guilt. Such a life may not be filled with riches, but it is rich in peace, and that peace, the Buddha taught, is worth more than gold. Right speech, right action, and right livelihood together form the ethical dimension of the path. They are the way inner clarity and intention manifest outwardly, shaping the world as well as the self. For to speak kindly is to hear kindness echoed back. To act gently is to live in a gentle world. To work honestly is to rest with an honest heart. These are not lofty ideals reserved for saints and sages. They are practical guides for every moment. Each word spoken can be weighed with care. Each act performed can be checked against compassion. Each choice of livelihood can be measured against the question, does this bring harm, or does this bring peace? And in choosing peace, step by step, the fire of suffering grows dim, and the cool air of freedom begins to flow. The Buddha knew that wisdom and compassion do not blossom by chance. Just as a garden left untended becomes tangled with weeds, so too does the mind grow wild without guidance. If we let anger root itself, it spreads. If we water fear, it deepens. If we encourage greed, it multiplies. Yet if we nurture kindness, it flourishes. If we give light to generosity, it grows. This is the meaning of right effort. the gentle discipline of guiding the mind toward clarity and peace. Effort, in this teaching, does not mean strain or force. It is not the clenched jaw or the furrowed brow. The Buddha compared it instead to the steady care of a gardener, who waters daily, who pulls weeds patiently, who tends without rush or violence. Right effort is this steady tending of the heart. It is the recognition that the mind becomes what it rehearses, and so we must choose carefully what we cultivate. The Buddha spoke of 4 aspects of this effort. The first is to prevent unwholesome states from arising, to notice when the conditions for anger or greed are gathering, and to step away before they take root. Like a traveler who sees storm clouds on the horizon and chooses shelter, we can learn to avoid situations and thoughts that stir up turmoil. The second is to abandon unwholesome states that have already arisen. When anger has flared, when fear grips, when envy clouds the mind, effort is the practice of letting go, of loosening the grip, not through suppression or denial, but through recognition, to see anger as anger, and in that recognition, to release it. The third is to cultivate wholesome states that have not yet arisen, to invite kindness, patience, compassion, wisdom into the heart, to read words that inspire, to spend time in the company of those who uplift, to plant the seeds of joy and gratitude. And the fourth is to maintain and deepen wholesome states that are already present. If calm has arrived, we nurture it. If compassion is blooming, we water it. If clarity shines, we protect it. Just as a flame must be shielded from the wind, so must wholesome states be preserved from distraction and neglect. This is right effort, not a battle, not a punishment, but a gentle discipline. It is like holding a child's hand as they learn to walk, steadying, encouraging, patient. The Buddha knew that the mind resists sudden force, but it responds to steady care. Day by day, with right effort, the mind grows lighter, clearer, more open. Imagine the mind as a clear pool of water. Every thought is like a pebble dropped into it. Angry thoughts stir the surface, creating ripples that distort the reflection. Compassionate thoughts settle gently, leaving the water clear. Right effort is the practice of choosing what pebbles we drop, of noticing when the water is disturbed, of letting the ripples fade. In this practice, there is no need for perfection. The Buddha reminded his followers that even small efforts matter. A single moment of kindness outweighs many hours of anger. A single act of letting go creates space for peace. To practice right effort is to trust that each choice, however small, shapes the heart. So effort, in the noble path, is not exhausting but refreshing. It is the discipline of caring for the mind as one cares for a flame, a garden, or a beloved friend. With it, the path becomes steady. Without it, the mind wanders endlessly. With it, every step is guided toward awakening. If right effort is the tending of the heart, right mindfulness is the art of inhabiting each moment fully. It is the practice of being here, awake, aware, rather than lost in the maze of memory and anticipation. The Buddha called mindfulness the direct path to awakening, for it reveals life as it actually is, not as the restless mind imagines it to be. To be mindful is to bring attention to the body, the feelings, the thoughts, and the world, without clinging or rejecting. It is to watch the breath as it rises and falls, to feel the warmth of the sun on the skin, to notice the sound of the wind in the trees. It is to taste food without distraction, to walk without haste, to speak while truly hearing oneself and the other. In mindfulness, the ordinary becomes luminous, for it is seen clearly. The Buddha taught that mindfulness is like a guardian standing at the gates of the mind. Without it, unwholesome states enter unnoticed, and wholesome states slip away. With it, the mind becomes alert, able to see anger as anger, joy as joy, pain as pain. In this recognition, we are no longer enslaved by them. He encouraged his followers to cultivate mindfulness in 4 domains: the body, the feelings, the mind, and the objects of the mind. To be mindful of the body is to dwell in its reality, the breath, the steps, the posture, the sensations. To be mindful of feelings is to notice whether they are pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, without clinging to them or pushing them away. To be mindful of the mind is to recognize its states, whether it is restless or calm, greedy or generous, deluded or clear. And to be mindful of objects of the mind is to see thoughts, teachings, and phenomena as they arise, to observe their impermanence, their emptiness, their interconnection. Mindfulness is not cold observation. It is warm, compassionate awareness. When we are mindful of pain, we do not push it aside, but hold it gently, as one would cradle a crying child. When we are mindful of joy, we do not cling to it greedily, but savor it with gratitude. Mindfulness allows us to be with life as it unfolds, without drowning in it or fleeing from it. Imagine walking through a garden. Without mindfulness, we hurry, thinking of what comes next, scarcely noticing the flowers. With mindfulness, we pause. We see the colors, the shapes, the delicate veins on each petal. We hear the hum of bees, the whisper of leaves. The garden is no longer ordinary. It is alive, radiant, fleeting. Mindfulness transforms the simplest moments into miracles. The Buddha himself spoke of mindfulness as the path to freedom. For when we are present, we see the arising and passing of all things. We see that thoughts are not solid, that feelings are not permanent, that the self we cling to is not fixed. In this seeing, the chains of craving begin to loosen. We no longer chase what cannot last, nor flee what must be faced. We rest in awareness, steady, unshaken. To cultivate mindfulness, he urged practice in both stillness and movement. In meditation, we sit with the breath, watching its rise and fall, training the mind to rest in presence. In walking, eating, working, speaking, we bring the same awareness so that life itself becomes meditation. Every act, however small, becomes an opportunity to awaken. Mindfulness is like a lamp carried into a dark room. At first, only a few shapes are revealed. With practice, more and more becomes visible, and what once seemed frightening in the dark is seen clearly and loses its power. To live with mindfulness is to live deeply. To sip tea and taste tea, not the 1,000 thoughts that swirl around it. To listen and truly hear, not to plan replies. To feel sorrow and truly allow it, not to resist or disguise it. In such presence, even suffering softens, for it is held in awareness rather than in resistance. Thus, right mindfulness is not only a practice, it is a way of being. It is the art of inhabiting the only moment we ever truly have, this one. And in this moment, seen with clarity, peace is already present. The Buddha often compared the mind to a monkey, leaping from branch to branch, restless, chattering, never still. In ordinary life, we experience this constantly. Thoughts pull us backward into memory or push us forward into anticipation. Worries buzz like insects. Distractions scatter the attention. Concentration feels fleeting, fragile, a flame flickering in the wind. But through practice, the Buddha discovered that the mind could be trained to rest, to gather itself, to shine with steady light. This training he called Right concentration. Right concentration is the practice of meditation that deepens the mind into stillness and clarity. It is the cultivation of one-pointed attention, the ability to rest fully on the present moment without scattering. The Buddha described states of deep absorption known as the jhanas, where the mind, freed from distraction, becomes filled with joy, peace, and equanimity. These states are not the goal in themselves, but they are powerful supports, allowing the mind to taste calm that is not dependent on external conditions. Imagine sitting by a quiet lake at dusk. The surface is perfectly still, reflecting the sky with clarity. This is what the mind becomes through concentration, a mirror unshaken by ripples. In such stillness, insight naturally arises. Just as the bottom of a lake can be seen clearly only when the water is calm, so the nature of reality is revealed only when the mind is concentrated. Right concentration begins with the breath. Each inhalation, each exhalation becomes the anchor. At first, the mind wanders, slipping away into thoughts. But gently, patiently, it is brought back, again and again. Like training a child to walk, the mind is guided back to the breath. Over time, it settles, the chatter quiets, the restlessness softens, awareness deepens. As concentration grows, joy arises. Not the joy of excitement, but the joy of stillness. It is a subtle happiness, like the warmth of sunlight on the skin, like the relief of setting down a heavy burden. The Buddha described this as a rapture that soothes the body and mind. And beyond joy, equanimity arises, a balance so deep that even pain and pleasure lose their sway. This concentration does not isolate us from life. It prepares us to see life more clearly. When the mind is scattered, we react impulsively, blinded by craving and fear. When the mind is concentrated, we respond with wisdom and compassion. We see anger as a passing storm, not as truth. We see desire as a fleeting spark, not as command. Concentration gives us the space to pause, to breathe, to choose. The Buddha himself sat in deep concentration beneath the Bodhi tree on the night of his awakening. It was through the steadiness of mind, unwavering, that he saw the arising and passing of all things. Right concentration, then, is not a luxury, but an essential part of the path. It is the discipline of creating the conditions for insight, the soil in which wisdom takes root. And yet, the Buddha warned, concentration must be balanced with mindfulness and wisdom. It is possible to become attached to the bliss of meditation, to cling to the calm as if it were the goal. But right concentration is not about escape. It is about freedom. The stillness it creates is meant to open the eyes, not close them. It is meant to support awakening, not replace it. To practice right concentration is to taste the soothing power of meditation. In the stillness, the heart rests. In the stillness, the mind clears. And from that clarity, compassion flows. For when we know peace within, we can offer peace to others. Right concentration is thus not an isolated practice, but the culmination of the path. It gathers the fruits of right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, and right mindfulness, and ripens them into deep serenity. It is the flowering of the path in the heart itself, and as the Buddha taught, even a moment of such concentration is precious. Even a brief pause in the restless chatter of the mind is a taste of freedom. For in that pause, we glimpse what it means to be fully present, fully alive, fully awake. The Buddha's path leads us to many profound truths, but among the most essential is the teaching of impermanence. known in his language as anicca. To see impermanence clearly is to change the way we live, the way we love, the way we face suffering. It is the recognition that everything passes, every joy, every sorrow, every thought, every breath. None of them endure. When the Buddha first saw the old man, the sick man, and the corpse, what struck him was impermanence. Youth fades, health falters, life itself dissolves. But impermanence is not confined to these dramatic moments. It is everywhere. The seasons turn, flowers bloom and wither, rivers rise and fall, even mountains erode, stars burn out, worlds shift and vanish. Nothing stays fixed. At first, this truth can feel unsettling. We long for permanence. We want the loved one's smile never to fade, the moments of happiness never to end, the body never to weaken. But life does not bow to our desires. To deny impermanence is to fight reality, and that fight is the root of suffering. To see impermanence clearly, though, is to begin to let go. When we understand that all things pass, we begin to hold them differently. We savor joy without clinging, knowing it is fleeting. We endure sorrow without despair, knowing it too will fade. Even restlessness, the buzzing mind that seems endless, is seen for what it is, a passing state, not a permanent prison. In this way, impermanence becomes not a curse, but a teacher. The Buddha often used simple images to illustrate this truth. He compared life to dew on grass at dawn, glittering in the sunlight, yet gone as the day warms. He spoke of a bubble on the surface of a stream, shimmering for a moment before bursting. He likened existence to a candle flame, flickering, momentary. These are not metaphors meant to darken the spirit, but to awaken gratitude. For when we see that each moment is brief, we appreciate it more deeply. Anicca reveals the futility of clinging. To cling to youth is to suffer as age arrives. To cling to health is to suffer as illness comes. To cling to possessions is to suffer when they are lost. To cling to life itself is to suffer when death approaches. But to release the grip, to accept impermanence, is to find peace. This is not resignation, not apathy. It is clarity. It is the ability to love fully while knowing that love cannot prevent change. It is the ability to work wholeheartedly while knowing results cannot last forever. It is the ability to rest in the present, knowing it is the only moment we ever truly possess. The Buddha himself reminded his disciples constantly of impermanence. He told them, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence." These were his final words, spoken as his body, too, obeyed the law of change. To remember impermanence is to remember that life is precious because it is fleeting. Even the difficulties of life reveal impermanence. Restlessness, grief, anger, fear. When we sit with them, we see that they shift and dissolve. No feeling, however intense, endures unchanged. The storm always passes. The night always gives way to dawn. This recognition allows us to face suffering with patience. It will not last. It never does. Impermanence also opens the heart to compassion. If we see that all beings are subject to change, to loss, to death, we understand that we share the same condition. We soften toward others, knowing their joys will fade as ours do. Their sorrows will pass as ours do. Impermanence binds us together, reminding us of our shared humanity. And so the teaching of Anicca is not only a truth to understand, but a practice to live. Each time we let go of clinging, each time we rest in the present, without demanding it be permanent, we practice impermanence. Each time we accept that this breath will pass, this thought will fade, this moment will never return, we grow more awake. In this awakening, impermanence becomes not frightening but liberating. For if nothing lasts, then suffering too will pass. If nothing is fixed, then change is always possible. And if all things end, then the door to freedom is always open. Among the most profound teachings of the Buddha, and perhaps the most difficult to grasp, is the teaching of no self, or anatta. To human ears, conditioned from birth to believe in a solid I, this teaching can sound strange, even unsettling. Yet the Buddha did not intend to create fear. He offered this insight as a doorway to freedom, as a key to dissolve the tight knot of ego that binds us to endless dissatisfaction. When we speak of ourselves, we say, I am this, I am that. We believe in a fixed essence, a core identity that endures unchanged. We cling to it fiercely, protecting it, defending it, feeding it with praise, with possessions, with recognition. Yet when we look closely, this self is nowhere to be found. The Buddha taught that what we call the self is only a collection of changing processes, the body, sensations, perceptions, thoughts, and consciousness arising and passing moment by moment. There is no single, permanent I behind them. Consider the body. It changes constantly, cell by cell, breath by breath. The body of childhood is gone, replaced by the body of youth, and that in turn, replaced by the body of age. To say, this is me, about the body, is like pointing to a river. The water is always flowing, never the same. Yet we give it a name and imagine it as fixed. Consider thoughts. They flicker like fireflies, appearing and disappearing without control. A thought of joy arises, then fades. A memory appears, then dissolves. To cling to them as me or mine is like trying to hold smoke in the palm of the hand. The Buddha's insight was clear. The self we cling to is a convenient story, but it is not reality. We say, I am happy, I am sad, I am strong, I am weak. But what we describe are states, not essences. Happiness arises and passes. Sadness arises and passes. Strength and weakness arise and pass. What remains constant is not an enduring self, but the process of change itself. At first, this teaching may feel like a loss. If there is no self, then what are we? But the Buddha urged his followers to look again. The sense of self, with its endless cravings and fears, is precisely what imprisons us. It is the self that demands recognition, that fears death, that clings to possessions, that resists impermanence. To loosen its grip is not to lose something essential, but to release a burden. Imagine a hand clenched tightly around a rope, pulled so hard that the rope burns the skin. This is the self, holding, grasping, suffering. Now imagine opening the hand, letting the rope fall away. The pain lessens, the hand relaxes, relief spreads through the body. To see no self is to open that hand, to let go of the illusion that there is a permanent I that must be protected at all costs. The Buddha himself experienced this liberation beneath the Bodhi tree. He saw that the body was not self, that feelings were not self, that perceptions, thoughts, and consciousness were not self. He saw that clinging to them as me led only to suffering. And in releasing that clinging, he discovered peace. This does not mean that life becomes meaningless, nor that individuality disappears into nothingness. The Buddha did not teach that people are empty voids. He taught that what we call the self is empty of permanence, empty of ownership, empty of separateness. Like a rainbow, dazzling yet insubstantial. The self appears but has no fixed core. To see this is not despair, but liberation. For without a solid self to defend, the heart opens naturally to compassion. Without me and mine, there is space for kindness, for generosity, for wisdom. The insight of no self dissolves fear. For what is it that fears death but the self, imagining itself as fixed and eternal? When we see that life is a flowing process, that birth and death are only moments in that flow, fear softens. Death is not the loss of a permanent self, but the continuation of change that has always been present. The insight of no self dissolves pride. For what is it that boasts, that demands recognition, that clings to superiority, but the self? When we see that there is no solid self to exalt, pride loses its grip. We act not to defend an identity, but to serve wisdom and compassion. And the insight of no self dissolves despair. For what is it that feels crushed under failure, rejected by the world, imprisoned by regret, but the self? When we see that the self is only a story, that no state is permanent, that everything changes, despair loosens. The story of I fades, and in its place arises the quiet recognition of life unfolding, moment by moment. The Buddha's teaching of anatta is not a philosophy to be debated, but a truth to be experienced. In meditation, when we watch the breath, the sensations, the thoughts, we begin to see them as processes, not possessions. The thought arises, but it is not mine. The pain arises, but it is not me. The joy arises, but it too will pass. This seeing brings freedom. For if nothing is me or mine, then what is there to cling to? What is there to fear? Thus, no self is the doorway to liberation. It dissolves the ego's grip and opens the heart to the vastness of existence. It is not a loss of self, but the discovery that we were never confined to one in the first place. It is the realization that we are not separate islands but waves in the same ocean, rising and falling, beautiful in our impermanence. With the insight of no self comes a natural flowering of compassion. For when we no longer cling to I and mine, we see more clearly the suffering of others as our own. Compassion, or karuna, is not an extra ornament in the Buddha's path. It is its beating heart. Without compassion, wisdom can become cold. Without wisdom, compassion can become blind. Together, they form the balance of awakening. Compassion arises when we look at another being and see their pain without turning away. It is the tender response of the heart to suffering. The Buddha taught that just as a mother loves her only child with boundless care, so should we cultivate love for all beings. This love is not sentimentality. It is the recognition of shared vulnerability, shared impermanence, shared longing for peace. When we suffer, we often feel isolated, as though our pain is uniquely ours. But compassion reveals the truth. All beings suffer. The bird fears the hawk, the deer fears the hunter, the child fears separation, the adult fears loss. To recognize this is to feel kinship. We are not alone in our struggles. We are part of a vast web of life, all moving through the same cycle of birth and death, joy and sorrow. Compassion lightens our own burdens because it turns the focus outward. When the self is tight and small, every slight feels enormous, every disappointment unbearable. But when the heart expands to include others, our own pain is held in a wider space. Helping another eases our own suffering. Speaking kindly dissolves our own anger. Offering forgiveness releases our own chains. The Buddha taught practices to cultivate compassion, such as metta meditation, where we send thoughts of loving kindness, first to ourselves, then to loved ones, then to strangers, then even to enemies, until the circle includes all beings. This practice trains the heart to soften, to expand, to see no boundary between self and other. Over time, compassion becomes as natural as breathing. Compassion is not weakness. It does not mean allowing harm or ignoring injustice. True compassion sees suffering clearly and acts with courage to relieve it. A parent pulls a child away from fire, not with anger, but with love. In the same way, compassion may be firm, but it is never cruel. The Buddha himself embodied compassion. After his awakening, he could have remained in stillness, absorbed in nirvana, but he chose to teach, to walk from village to village for decades, sharing the path so that others might be free. His life was compassion in action, born of the recognition that suffering binds all beings, and release is possible for all. Compassion transforms the world because it transforms the heart. A harsh word, replaced with kindness, changes not only the listener, but the speaker. A generous act ripples outward, inspiring more generosity. A moment of forgiveness breaks the chain of anger that might otherwise last generations. Compassion is contagious, and its presence spreads peace like fragrance from a flower, and compassion transforms the self. For when we love others, we loosen the grip of ego. We step out of the narrow prison of me and enter the vastness of we. In this expansion, suffering lightens. The burdens we thought we carried alone are shared, dissolved in the flow of empathy. Thus, compassion is not only for others, it is for ourselves. It frees us from isolation, from bitterness, from fear. It opens the heart to the truth that love is not a finite resource, to be hoarded and rationed, but an infinite well, deepened each time we draw from it. To live with compassion is to walk gently in a fragile world. It is to hold each being tenderly, knowing their struggles mirror our own. It is to offer kindness freely, knowing that in giving, we also receive. In this way, compassion is both the expression of awakening and the path to it. Nirvana has often been described in countless ways, sometimes as a mysterious state beyond words, sometimes as the end of all suffering, sometimes as a realm of peace beyond birth and death. Yet the Buddha, in his wisdom, chose to describe it in simple, direct terms: the extinguishing of craving, the quieting of fear, the stilling of the restless fires of the mind. Nirvana is not a faraway place, not a paradise hidden in the sky. It is a state of being, present whenever the fires of desire, hatred, and delusion have gone out. To understand nirvana, imagine a flame burning on oil. As long as the oil is fed, the flame continues, flickering, consuming. But when the oil is gone, the flame goes out naturally, not with violence, not with struggle, but with a simple quiet. So too with the fires of craving that burn within the human heart. They feed on desire for pleasure, on clinging to self, on fear of loss. And as long as they are fed, suffering continues. But when craving ceases, when the mind no longer clings, the fires go out. This is nirvana, the coolness that follows the burning, the stillness that follows the storm. It is important to see that nirvana is not annihilation. When the flame goes out, it does not mean there is nothing. It means there is peace. What vanishes is not life itself, but the restless hunger that torments life. In nirvana, fear dissolves because there is no longer a self to defend, no longer a future to dread. In nirvana, craving dissolves because there is nothing left to grasp, nothing to resist. What remains is pure awareness, vast, luminous, steady. The Buddha often described nirvana as the highest bliss, but not bliss as the world knows it. Worldly bliss is fleeting, dependent on conditions. The sweetness of music, the comfort of companionship, the pleasure of food or wealth. Such joys arise and fade, leaving behind longing for more. But the bliss of nirvana is unconditioned. It is not born of change, so it does not end with change. It is the happiness of freedom, the joy of being untouched by the push and pull of desire. For the one who realizes nirvana, life is still lived. The body still grows old. Sickness may still come, and death is certain. But the mind is no longer bound by fear of these things. Suffering may arise in the body, but it does not take root in the heart. Loss may come, but it does not shatter. Praise and blame, gain and loss, joy and pain, these pass like winds through an open field, leaving no mark. The one who abides in nirvana lives in stillness, even in the midst of change. We can taste glimpses of this stillness even before awakening. When anger fades and forgiveness enters, there is peace. When a desire is released, there is quiet relief. When we sit in stillness and the mind rests in the breath, there is a taste of freedom. Nirvana is this peace perfected, complete, unshakable. It is the final end of all restlessness. The Buddha did not describe nirvana as something distant or reserved for saints long after death. He taught that it could be touched here and now, in this life, through the practice of letting go. He urged his followers to see nirvana not as something to imagine, but as something to experience directly. For when craving is absent, even for a moment, nirvana is revealed. To speak of nirvana as stillness is to speak of the heart finally at rest, no longer driven to grasp, no longer pushed by fear. The mind abides like a vast ocean, unmoved by waves on its surface. It is still, but alive, quiet, but radiant. It is the deepest fulfillment a human being can know, the homecoming to a peace that was always possible, waiting beneath the layers of grasping and delusion. Thus, nirvana is not something added to life, but something uncovered when the noise of craving falls silent. It is the ultimate quieting, the cessation of the restless turning of the wheel. And in that quiet, the awakened one dwells, free, compassionate, serene. And now, as the night draws on and the breath slows, it is time to let the teachings of the Buddha blend gently into the rhythm of sleep. For the wisdom he shared was not only for monks in forests or wanderers on dusty roads. It was for every human being, in every ordinary moment of life. It was for those who rise in the morning, who labor in the day, who rest in the night. It was for you, here, listening, drifting, breathing. The Buddha's wisdom tells us that suffering exists, but that it is not the whole story. It tells us that suffering arises from craving, but also that craving can end. It tells us there is a path, a way of living that leads to peace. And in that path are steps we can walk every day, seeing clearly, setting intentions, speaking kindly, acting gently, working honestly, guiding the mind, being mindful, resting in concentration. Tonight, you need not walk the whole path. Tonight, it is enough to take one step, the step of letting go into rest. Just as the Buddha discovered stillness beneath the Bodhi tree, so you too can discover stillness beneath your blankets, beneath the soft rise and fall of your own breath. There is nothing to achieve in this moment, nothing to grasp, nothing to defend. Only the simple act of being here, of breathing, of resting. As your body grows heavier, let it remind you of impermanence. Every sensation, pleasant or unpleasant, arises and passes. The tension in the shoulders eases. The tightness in the chest loosens. Each breath dissolves into the next, a river flowing without effort. Even restlessness fades when watched with patience. You do not need to push it away. Simply let it pass, like clouds across a sky. The Buddha taught that no fixed self holds these thoughts, these sensations, these drifting dreams. They are processes, unfolding, changing. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, you too can loosen the grip of I and mine. The worries that circle the mind are not you. The regrets and plans are not you. They are currents moving through the stream of consciousness, and they will pass. In sleep, the self softens, dissolves, releasing you into a wider stillness. Compassion, too, can accompany you into sleep. As you rest, imagine your breath as a gift of kindness, first to yourself, then radiating outward. Inhaling peace, exhaling goodwill, sending gentle wishes to those you love, to those you do not know, even to those who have caused you pain. Letting compassion lighten your burdens as surely as it lightens theirs. And now, let Nirvana's stillness echo in your own stillness. The craving for one more thought, one more memory, one more plan can be set down. The fear of tomorrow can be set down. The defenses of the ego can be set down. What remains is simple: a body resting, a mind softening, a heart open. This, too, is a taste of freedom. As you drift deeper, let each breath guide you, like a boat on calm waters, carrying you gently across the night. The Buddha's wisdom whispers, everything passes. The day has passed. Its joys and burdens are behind you. Tomorrow has not yet come. Only this moment, this breath, this stillness exists. Rest here. Stay here. Let sleep take you. As softly as a lotus closing at dusk, the path of awakening will wait for you in the morning. For now, peace is enough. For now, stillness is enough. For now, sleep is enough. And now, as this journey comes to a close, may you rest deeply, free from the weight of the day. Sleep well, breathe gently, and let peace surround you like a soft blanket. If you are still awake, allow your mind to wander into one of the 2 videos now on your screen, each a continuation of calm reflection. And if this time together has brought you comfort, consider subscribing so that more nights can be filled with stillness, wisdom, and rest. May your dreams be light, and may tomorrow greet you with ease.